Hi readers. Today we're going to be discussing the major similarities and differences between two poems by analyzing both the structure and the meaning of poems. So today I'm going to walk you through how we read a poem 3 times so that we are able to analyze what we're thinking, how the poem was structured, and then finally, what does the poem mean? So I'm going to ask you to get out a piece of notebook paper, and I want you to title it Poem 1 Premier Lesson. Then I want you to take your paper and I want you to create a 3-column chart. In the first column, I want you to label it first, thoughts. The first time we read a poem, we're just going to jot down anything that we're thinking. The second column is going to be structure. The second time we read a poem, we're just going to focus on the structure. How many stanzas? How many lines? Is there any vocabulary that's important to know? Is there a rhyme scheme? And the third time we read a poem is going to be to figure out what is the meaning? What is the gist? What is the speaker of the poem trying to tell me? I'll give you 30 seconds to finish setting up your notebook page so it looks exactly like mine. Alright, if you're not quite finished, you can pause the video and then restart once your page is set up. Alright, so here is the poem. It can also be found on the It's Learning page. The first time, let's just read it. A lot of times when you read a poem for the first time, it doesn't make a lot of sense and you're confused, and that's okay. The first time you read a poem is simply just to think about what you're thinking and your metacognitive thoughts. What thoughts do you have? What questions do you have? What are you confused about? And that's what you're going to record and think about the first time you read it. Follow along as I read our first poem, which is called Primer Lesson by Carl Sandburg. Look out how you use proud words. When you let proud words go, it is not easy to call them back. They wear long boots. They walk off proud. They can't hear you calling. Look out how you use proud words. All right, so as I read that, the first thing that I noticed right away was the word proud was repeated a lot. So I'm going to record that down. I was also confused about proud words, wear long boots. What does that mean? So I'm going to put a question mark there. And that was pretty much my first thoughts. I just noticed that the word proud was used a lot, and then I was confused about the part saying that they wear long boots and they walk off proud. That was confusing to me. The second time we read a poem, we're going to reread it again. And it does help if you read poetry out loud. So you can either whisper read it or you can read it to yourself, but it is really helpful. Poetry is meant to be heard. And you'll notice that when I'm reading poetry, I don't stop at each line, but I stop where the punctuation is. So follow along as I read this for a second time. And this time when we read it, I'm just going to focus on structure. Look out how you use proud words. When you let proud words go, it is not easy to call them back. They wear long boots. They walk off proud. They can't hear you calling. Look out how you use proud words. So when we think of structure, I want us to think of, one, how many stanzas in it. A stanza is kind of like a paragraph, only we don't call them paragraphs in poetry, we call them stanzas. And then I also want you to count how many lines there are. A line is kind of like a sentence. So if we look at this example on our page, we see that there are 2 stanzas, 1 stanza and 2 stanzas. We also see that this poem has 1, 2, 3, 4 lines in each stanza. And so that means that this entire poem has a total of 8 lines, and we could count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the last thing is looking for, do we notice, is there any rhyme? So when you get into middle school, they start to teach you about rhyme schemes. And I'm going to show you now. It's not something you need to know how to do, but sometimes figuring out the rhyme scheme is kind of fun. So when we read this poem on the screen, we see that there are some rhyming words. So we use letters to see if a poem has a rhyme scheme. So the first one, you focus on the last word. So birthday would be, we would mark it with an A. Luck does not rhyme with birthday, so we would mark it with a B. Born does not rhyme with luck or birthday, so we would mark it with a C. Duck rhymes with luck, so because luck has the letter B, we will mark duck with the letter B. And we're going to move down to the second stanza. Born rhymes with born, because it's the same word, so we would mark it with C. Moo does not rhyme with any of those, so we would mark it with a D. Didn't doesn't rhyme with any of those. And zoo rhymes with moo, so we would mark it with a D. And so the rhyme scheme would simply be A, B, C, B. C, D, E, D. So what do we notice? We notice that this poem does have a rhyme scheme, and we notice that the second and fourth line in each stanza rhymes. So let's go back to the poem that we were reading, and let's jot down some of the things about the structure. Well, we notice that there's only one stanza in this poem. There's only one paragraph, one stanza. And when we count the lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines. This poem has 7 lines, or 7 sentences. The other thing that we want to notice is when I reread it, it doesn't rhyme. So no rhyme. No rhyme scheme. The other thing is the vocabulary word of proud. So when we think of this word and we think of vocabulary, we want to make sure that we understand, well, what does it mean? And in this case, proud kind of means like proud words, or kind of like bragging words. So proud, we're going to kind of think of as the word of bragging. The third time we read a poem, we are going to reread it again. And now we're going to try to figure out what it means. Look out how you use proud words. Remember, we said bragging words. When you let proud words go, it is not easy to call them back. They wear long boots. They walk off proud. They can't hear you calling. Look out how you use proud words. So we have to ask ourselves, what is this poem trying to tell us? Well, if we think about this, the author's telling us something, right? The speaker is saying, don't brag. Don't use bragging words or proud words. So why would he be telling us that? It's a couple things that we could figure out, but he's telling us that you can't take back words. And so what he's telling us is you need to think before you speak, because you might regret the words you use. Okay? So that's what that poem means. And a lot of times when we read a poem 3 times and we focus on different things, we start to break it down, and a poem that we didn't really understand when we first read it now makes sense. And I can even go back. They wear long boots. They walk off proud. They can't hear you calling. So a lot of times when you say those proud words, they stand out and people notice them. But sometimes they make it sound like you're too arrogant and you're bragging that maybe you're better than someone else. And you might not mean to use the proud words in that way. So you really do have to think before you speak. All right, friends, now it is going to be your turn. So I'm going to ask you to slide down to a new space. And this time you're going to be reading the second poem today, which is called I Am Nobody, Who Are You? By Emily Dickinson. You're going to set up your page exactly how we set it up for our first one. So you're going to have 3 columns. The first column is going to be all of your thoughts. The second column is going to be the structure, the lines, the stanzas, vocabulary words, does it rhyme? And then the third column is going to be, you're going to figure out, what is the speaker trying to tell us? While you're setting up that, I will tell you that Emily Dickinson, she was a very lonely person, and she actually spent a majority of her life just living in her room. Her poems were discovered in a drawer by her sister, and her sister actually published her poems. She didn't title her poems, she numbered them. So a lot of times when you see Emily Dickinson poems, they're either numbered or they just use the very first line of the poem. And Emily Dickinson is very, very famous, but she didn't become famous until after she died because no one even knew that she wrote poetry while she basically stayed in her room. All right, so you're going to toggle back to your It's Learning page when you're ready. You're going to go slide down to where it says poems, and you're going to read poem 2, I'm Nobody, Who Are You? And you are going to record anything that you're thinking. What are you thinking? What do you notice? What do you wonder? You're going to read it again to figure out the structure of the poem. What did Emily Dickinson do? How many stanzas? How many lines? What vocabulary sticks out? And finally, you're going to figure out what is the meaning of this poem. Once you're finished jotting those thoughts down, then the final thing you're going to do today is you're going to reflect. Think about primer lesson that I just shared with you from Carl Sandsberg. Think about the poem of Emily Dickinson wrote, I Am Nobody, Who Are You? And then I want you to think about the question in the Padlet. And I want you to think about what would the speaker of I Am Nobody, Who Are You say to the speaker of the poem primer lesson. You're going to record your thought in the Padlet, and then we're going to come back together. We're going to look through the Padlet, and we're going to highlight some of the responses. All right, readers, off you go.